Today we're going to create a Spring Boot application with an embedded React app. All right, let's jump into it. First thing we're going to do is create a GitHub repository for our project. So we're going to create a repository. I'm going to call it Spring Boot Loves React. Okay, sounds good. And this is going to be a Spring Boot application with a React app. We'll create a java.ignore. We'll create the repo. And I will then go clone this Git repository. Okay, I have a directory on my desktop, sp react, and I'm going to do a git clone and specify that URL. Now I have the foundation for my project. I'm going to move into that. I'm going to create a couple directories. First directory I'm going to create is called React. Second directory I'm going to create is going to be Java. If I spell it right, there we go. So I'm going to go into the React directory and I'm going to run npx create React app. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call this front end. Okay, our React app is all set up now. I'm going to go ahead and create the Java application. I'm going to create the Java application with Spring Boot initializer. I'm going to create a Maven project. I'll use Spring Boot 1.0. I'll give it a group name. I'm going to call this SB Love. Artifact name SB Love. And for the package name for the group, I'm going to make that com.thomasj consulting. And then for the name is SB Love. And this is going to be a Spring Boot application. Wrapping React. I will use Java 20. I'm going to add some dependencies. The first dependencies I want is Spring Web. The second dependency I want, I'm going to throw Lombok in there. Okay, these are the basic dependencies I want right now. I'm going to say generate. I will then take and download this zip file into my Java directory. And I will unzip it in here. And then I'll delete that. So now we have the code in there. So now I can take this code and I can open that up in IntelliJ simply by dropping the POM file on top of IntelliJ. I'll say trust project. Okay, and let's go ahead and see if we can run this. We'll enable Lombok. Everything looks good, and we're running on port 8080. So on the Spring Boot side, I'm going to go in, I'm going to create a controller with a REST service. So I'll create a new package. I'll call that controller. And in this, I'm going to create a hello REST controller. I'm going to annotate this with @REST controller. I'm going to set a request mapping, and all my APIs are going to be based off of API. And I'm going to create a get mapping. I'm just going to call this /hello. And it's going to be public string say hello. I'm going to return a string. For that string, I'm actually going to put some JSON in it. I'm going to have a message token. Hello world. Okay, let's start up our REST controller again. I'm going to use Postman and make sure our REST controller works. So API/hello. And we get back a formatted message, a JSON string, MSG, hello world. So I think we're okay for our REST controller now. Now, our next step is to work on the React project. For that, I'm going to go into the front-end code. I'm going to run Visual Studio Code. So for that, I can just type code space dot. Now we have Visual Studio Code up and running. So we need to go through and add a little bit of code in here. So to start with, we have the app.js. So I'm going to open a terminal, and I'm going to run npm start. And this will run this application on port 3000. So now we have our basic application running on port 3000. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through here and delete this code. I don't want to use any of it. I'm going to create a H1 in here. I'm going to say sample application. We save that. We can go back to the browser and verify our sample applications there. So in here, we're going to add React router. So to do that, I'm going to stop the running application. We're going to want to install React router DOM. And we're also going to make some calls to a API, and I want to install the axios library. So I'll do an npm install axios. We'll open up our package.json just to make sure we have the right version of React router DOM. We need to make sure we have at least version 6.4 installed. Okay, and we do. So everything is good here. So now that we have our sample application up and running here, what we want to do is have the capability to go to another page. And to do that, we need to configure another page, and I'll call this page home in this case. I'm just going to create it in the same directory for now. I'm going to create a home.js. And in here, I'm going to use a shortcut, React Functional Component, or FC. and will just be home. I'm going to remove this export here, and I just prefer having export default home at the bottom. And then we're going to import this in. So we'll do an import home from /home. So now we can add that in, and that will be our second page. We need to configure some React router components. So in here, we need to import some elements. And those elements will be create browser router, create routes element, create provider, and create route. What we are going to do is use this in our return, and we're going to wrap everything with a router. So we're going to add in a create browser router, and within that we're going to create routes elements, and within those routes elements we're going to define a route. The first route we're going to have is going to be the top level. And then we're going to have a element of a route layout, and we'll have to go create that. So let's go through and create our route layout real quick. Again, I'll do an RFC to create that, and we'll export that as well. We'll import that just like we did home. And now we have a root element in there. Let's go through and define everything we need to have in our route layout. In our route layout, what we're going to do is define a React Router DOM outlet. So we'll import outlet from there, and then we will change what we'll return. This is just going to be a fragment. We can do that with a simple div. And we can say, essentially, in our main content, an outlet. Okay, and this will render our page from the router within here. So that's the first part of this. Now we have the root element. Now we need to go and define our actual routes. And that's defined by another route element. So we're within our elements here, we're going to define another route. within this route, we can now define our primary index, and in our index we need to have our actual index. So now we need to go create another page called index. I'm going to call this index page. And we'll call this index. Export default index. And within our app now, we need to go through and import him. Now we have our index defined in here. So that's going to be the primary. And now we're going to define another page. In this case, that's going to be our home page. So we don't want to set the index. This is going to be home. So now that we have this, we can actually start this back up. And we need to make sure that this all gets returned properly. So there's another thing we need to do. We need to return not this code, but this code. Return a provider. We send in a router. Remember, we created a router up here. Okay, so this is our new code. Let's run npm start, and let's see this work. All right, that looks good. All right, that looks good. We have the word index there. And if we type in /home, it says not found. So it did not find a mapping for our home. Let's go fix that. So we did not give the home an actual route. So we need to give it a path. Path. All right. Now let's go back and check up on our page now. There we go. So if we don't have anything here, it goes to our home. If we do, it goes there. Okay, so that's working as we would like for the basic router setup. We want to take another step, and when we run this, we're going to have the home page actually go and do something. And I want to proxy the request to our Tomcat server. For remember, our Tomcat is running on port 8080. So for development mode, I'm going to add in here a proxy into my package.json. And this says proxy web requests that appear to be local, that aren't resolved locally to this port. And those will be our API requests. Okay, so we have our proxy configured now. And we have our app.js. We should be okay here. In our index page, we just return index. That should be okay. We want to go ahead and add a button in there, and we want that to navigate. So what we're going to do is create a link. I'm going to want it to link to the home page. So I'll need to add React Navigation DOM in here as well. And I'm going to say import link from React Router DOM. And now I should be able to use a link in here. Is your index page, and then in here I will say go to home, and let's see if I can add a link in here like that. And the link is going to need some information. I'm going to say just home. How does it get there? We need to tell it how to get there, and we can simply go to home. That's it. So let's go try that. This is your home page. Go to home. Let's click that. Oh, look, it goes to home. All right, so simple enough. Let's add a little bit of additional code. I'm just going to add a P in here. Just give it line break. Now on the home page, I actually want to make that call whenever the home page is loaded. How can we do that? On the home page, I want to add some text in here. Well, we can actually do that quite simply. With the React Router 6, we can have the concept of a loader. So for our home page, we have just home. But if I add in here a loader, I'm going to call this as home loader. And now I can use this home loader when we define in here as home as a loader. We don't have it defined yet, so we need to go and define it. So let's go on our home page, and in here we need to define what the actual loader is going to do. We're going to add in axios to start with. So in our home, we need to define our loader. So now we have the loader in here. In addition, we need to actually do something with this loader. We can pass parameters to it, etc. There's a lot of things we can do, but for right now, we're not doing that. I'm going to return a defer. Specifically, this is going to be our message content. And we're going to call get hello. So now we need to define our get hello in here. We also have to define the defer keyword, and the defer keyword is used with our React Router DOM. So import defer. In addition, now that we have this, we need to get the hello method up and running. And since we call this defer, we need to define this here as an async function, get hello, and we need to have a response from await axios .get. Remember, we put in the proxy. Now this is API/hello. This should now go through and get the response. We can now return to response.data. So this should call our hello API. Need a slash in front of that. So this is looking good. Now that we have the API call in there, we actually need to facilitate using that. And we can use the use loader data. So again, we have to add that into React DOM. And now that we've added that in there, we can actually go through and add that into our content. So what we'll do, we'll have an H1, And in here, I'm simply going to talk about the return of that, and I'm going to say await resolve equals loader data around the await, see why that failed. There we go. Okay, so once we resolve that, let's put an H2 in here. Okay, so if we go back to our previous page, we go into home, so we can tell that it is in fact calling the service. So now we can tell that we have our application running on port 3000, but our server running on port 8080. So how can we combine all this stuff? Well, that's the next step. One of the things that we can do is we can package this whole front end into a build directory. So from our front end, we can run npm run build. Okay, so we now have the environment built. So if we go and look in these folders again, in our Spring Boot and React front end, we have all these files in the build. I'm going to copy these files, and we're going to go back to the Java now. In the Java, in the source, we have in main resources, and we have a static folder. I'm going to place these files in the static folder so that they can be served as static content. Now I'm going to change this from port 3000 to port 8080. And it just doesn't work right. We're missing some components of our Spring Boot application that we need to fix. So going back into the application, we need to add in here a filter. So I'm going to go create a new directory. I'm going to call it filter. And within that directory, I'm going to create something called a SPA filter for single page application. Okay, and I'm going to make that a component. I'm going to add in the SL4J. I'm going to extend the once per request filter. So every time we get an HTTP request, this filter is ran one time. But if there's filter chaining going on, it's not called. Okay, so now I need to add in a method. That way everything will compile, but we need to do a little bit of logic in here. So the first thing we're going to do is get the request, the path, and then once we have the path, then we can start looking at some of the values of it. I'm actually going to add into the request to make it lowercase. And then what we want to do, and do a do filter on the request, but in the middle, we want to do a little bit of logic. So if this is not a slash, and it's not an API, remember we have some API stuff, and if it's not a slash static, because we have some static pages, we go in here now, we have a whole bunch of files in here. If if it's not a manifest, if it's not a favicon, if it's not a robot, if it doesn't end with XML, JSON, JPEG, GIF, PNG, any of the file formats that are natively served, that we want to send them to /index.html. And if we notice in here, we have index.html. That's part of the files we copied over, and it has a whole bunch of custom content in here. So we're going to serve all this stuff in here. I'm going to stop the application server, and I'm going to restart it. Now we're going to go back to a web browser, and we're going to take a look at that. Now I'm using Chrome, so one of the things I want to do is go into an inspect, and I want to reload this page and all the caches. So I inspected it to get into the Chrome tools. I will then press and hold this recycle button. I will right click on the clear cache and reload. And then notice I now have my home page. And let me click on the home page, and it says hello world. And if I hit the refresh while on home page, it works. And if we go through and look at our output from our IntelliJ while we do some of this stuff, so if we refresh this again from the home, we can see that there was a call to home, and it was forwarded to the index.html. If we don't forward this to the index.html, there's no /home page. Everything has to go through the index.html because that maps it to the JavaScript. The JavaScript has the bundle in it. If we view this source file, we see that everything in here goes through the static JS main. This is the bundle. So it has to go through that bundle to work properly. So there you have it. We have everything up and running. React Router DOM version 4 working. And it goes to the server. Notice we did not put in any CORS handling on the server. Why did not we have to do that? We have an API because it looks like it's on the same domain. Since we actually contained it, we're going to port 8080. It is the same domain. And when we ran it in development mode, we put in the proxy entry and the package.json file so it looks like it's in the same domain to the browser. So with those two changes, we don't have any CORS problems. Life is so much simpler. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe and like. Tell your friends. Thank you.